So, welcome to the Lady Leadership Show. I'd like to welcome Nikki Ricks to the show today. So, I met Nikki a couple of months ago. Nikki has a super interesting background, and the reason I met her is that she came up in an email from General Assembly, who do a lot of training, and she had actually gone back and reskilled herself as a developer. So, I wanted to have a chat today to Nikki about reskilling as a developer and also having a background in helping startups, plus also being what she calls an intrapreneur. And so I found all these subjects fascinating. So when she came up, I thought, yeah, I have to call Nikki. So welcome, Nikki.
Oh, thank you. So happy to be here.
So you just have so I think you started your career in town planning, went through to supporting startups, and now you've become a developer. Tell me
Yes.
more, please.
Yeah, I got a master's degree in urban planning, town planning, city planning, you can call it whatever. And then I was working at an architecture firm, and I didn't know the term at the time, but I was definitely an intrapreneur. So I would go to the partners and say like, hey, there's this great, new software that we could use. I think it could be really good for employee retention. Or, hey, there's this new thing that I learned in the HBR podcast about X, Y, and Z. And they just, couldn't be bothered, right? Like they just weren't interested, right? And that's fine. Like I was, mid 20s and but I'm a millennial, and so I'm like annoying. I think I have all the answers probably in their eyes, right? And so I had my first daughter at the time, and I wanted, I found myself when I would go into work being like, I am paying a babysitter right now $15 an hour. This was in Chicago.
Yeah.
$15 an hour to sit in this meeting to watch my boss like put his feet up on the table and just chat. Like that's how I'm spending my money,
Wow.
I just found this like, okay, I want to work. I want to use my time like really wisely, and I want to work. It's not like I'm not one of those mothers where I was like, I want to be with my baby. I wanted to work.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted I just wanted the time that I was working I valued it more than I ever had.
Yeah.
Because I had to pay for my time too, right? So that's where I kind of started dabbling in a bunch of different businesses, one of them being co-working with childcare, which landed me on the front page of the Chicago Tribune business section, which then one of my coworkers put on my desk with, my face. And I was just kind of like, I need to quit. Like, what am I doing here at this architecture firm? I need to pursue this thing. So that's where it kind of led me into startup land.
Yeah. But I think, if you are keen, if you are eager and you're sort of whacking against that wall, and like if they'd been saying to you, hey, Nikki, that's a terrific idea. We should definitely try that out. Why don't you try it out? Come back to us, show us how it works, blah, blah, blah. You would have felt more fulfilled. You would have felt more engaged. You would have been going, oh, yeah, this is terrific. But that kind of hearing that no. And I think also it wasn't like you were saying, oh, hey, I won't do the job that you're paying me for. Like I'm willing to kind of take this extra stuff off. Yeah, frustrating.
Yeah.
So then you would like, okay, I've got to do something else.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that's where those entrepreneurial skills turned out to be transferable to entrepreneurial skills.
Yeah.
And that's that personality type of, what's a challenge and how can we approach it, and what is value that we could bring to the market, and how could I research the market and talk with potential users and be able to fulfill that with a product or a service. That's where I went down the road of co-working with childcare, researching the market, doing pop-up events, and then eventually realizing that it wasn't a viable business model. And I'm still very vindicated by that answer because it still hasn't been validated.
Yeah.
by the market 7 years later. So yeah, when I was doing that, I met a lot of incredible female entrepreneurs, and I always just had a million questions for them and wanted to know what they were doing, what they were trying, how they were going about it, which then just turned into like, oh, maybe I could help you. So that's what turned into my consulting practice of working with female entrepreneurs. So when I first started out, I was working with a lot of service and product-based businesses. In the tech world, they use product as well as, I mean, physical product,
Yeah.
like a clothing line, that sort of thing.
Uh-huh.
And then I started to get really interested and passionate about the tech entrepreneurship. And so I still stayed on the business side of it. I worked at an angel investor firm called Scale Investors for a little bit and was involved with them. I worked at an accelerator program called Startup Bootcamp. I
Yeah.
also did some consulting at Acme X, which was for creative entrepreneurs, which was fantastic. And I met incredible people through that. And then I sort of just had this realization, when you're like having a conversation with someone and you're at like a cocktail hour and then there's other people having a conversation and
Yeah.
you're like, what are they talking about?
Yeah.
I found myself talking to other business people and then overhearing the tech people talking and wanting to be like, what's that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I started doing some casual self-learning, which turned into more serious self-learning, which turned into, oh, wow, like this is really important to me. I find a lot of value in learning these technical skills,
Yeah.
and that's the path that I want to go down.
Uh-huh.
So
And
yeah, I enrolled in the General Assembly Software Engineering Immersive,
yeah.
and that was last year. And yeah, right after that, that's when we met.
Yeah. And now you're a fully fledged developer.
And here I am, just I know everything now.
And so what are you enjoying about being a developer?
Yeah. So I think that like before I became a developer, I was really um I felt like the never-ending learning felt really daunting
Mm.
and unattractive, that you could just it's always updating. You're always having to upskill.
Yeah.
But that's actually the thing that I love about it now.
Yeah.
I love that it's always going to be a challenge, that I'm now on this path where I will always be able to learn something new. And not that you can't in other industries, but the how concrete and tangible the learning is and how technical the learning is really interesting to me.
And I think, a lot of IT people get a hard time, and I think I'm doing a podcast about this in a couple of weeks, about, you know, um, I think it's that core understanding that people don't realize what's being done has most likely not been done before in exactly the same way. So something
Mm,
is always changing, and it is
mm,
you're always having to try new things. And so, you know, it's not like finance where you run the end of month and it's the same end of month that you run every single time. Um,
mm.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And it's also to that same point, if you don't evolve, if you don't update,
Yeah.
it will hurt you. And
Ooh,
so you can either decide to update and you can decide to learn, and to evolve and be cutting edge,
yeah.
or you're going to be obsolete and things will be harder for you because of it. So yeah, it's interesting. We're having a conversation about switching programming languages from Java to Go.
Mhm.
And so that's been an interesting conversation, which brings up some of those points of, how long will Java be around? And kind of that guessing game of the future is also really hard, because it's not like it's a black and white answer of like, well, Go is cutting edge. And so we go with
Go,
go.
go with
Go with go.
no, and there's pros and
Um,
cons, and that's the thing with kind of IT and particularly languages. There's pros and cons with them in terms of
right.
the sort of environment around them and the people, the knowledge, and kind of the capability and all of that. I mean, I was at university studying IT when the first version of Word came out, so that's how old I am.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's right. My grandfather said, "I think computers are going to be around for a while. I think you should study computers." He was pretty correct in that.
Oh, I love
And
that.
so, like, what would you recommend then for anyone that's wanting to reskill?
To reskill. I love that you use that term reskill.
Yeah,
That caught my ear when you were saying it at the beginning, because I feel like people typically use the term upskill, which I think
oh,
is a bit patronizing, right?
yeah, yeah,
Uh, so it's essentially saying that like where your skill level is at now isn't sufficient, and so you need to upskill. And I think I really like the fact that you're saying reskill. Okay, so now ask me the question again. What? I got distracted about how great your
I like
terminology was.
on it. I didn't even think about it myself. So, what would you recommend for anyone wanting to reskill? Yeah, because I think sorry,
Uh,
I think it's really right. You're not upskilling. You've already got a set of skills. It's like
mhm.
we're not upgrading you. We're putting in another program and adding it to your.
Yeah, totally. So I think that just reskilling in general, I think that it's looking at where you want to go, where you want to be in 5 years, and maybe evaluating if you even need to reskill, right? Or if you need to understand that you already have the skills and value that about yourself. So you may not need to acquire any others. But so it's just starting there. But I think that when it comes to acquiring other skills, it's looking at, okay, where do I want to be? And
What
what
do I
skills do I
need?
need to acquire?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, it's also that kind of curiosity. Like, I
Mm.
can tell from your background, you're just a continuous learner. You're curious, you want to
Mm.
explore new things. There was a part of that startup world where you're like, I'm not quite where I want to be in this space. So I want to
Yeah.
do some reskilling so I can have a deep
Yeah.
conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that curiosity is definitely what I always kind of lean to when imposter syndrome comes about, or when it comes to, well, who am I? Or when it comes to, oh, I'm too old, or whatever, the scariness of life and the fear. Um, yeah, the curiosity is a approach I think has always helped me.
Absolutely. And so, um, tell me about them being a woman in IT.
Yeah, well, I've only been a woman in IT professionally since early May, so late June, so almost 2 months. Um, but being a student in IT, I started doing casual self-learning this time last year around. And then when I was a student,
Yeah.
there's definitely biases there.
Yeah. So talk to me about what you see.
Yeah, so I think that just straight away, when you're online, like all the usernames are male, right? Like just even that alone, like when you're on Stack Overflow and you're Googling answers and you're seeing what the usernames are.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Like
Gotcha.
I found myself,
Yeah. If you're doing some
yeah,
problem solving and you're looking for some technical answers that people have said, I've got a problem, the people responding are male.
yeah, or the blog posts are written by male. And I think that these are just things that like maybe people aren't bothered by, but it's just how it is, right? So
Mhm.
it's not like I have to read a blog post, on a technical blog post, and it has to be a woman or a man or whatever,
Yeah.
but it's just how it is from the get-go when you just start Googling, you know? I don't actually think that I have taken any online courses, or now that I'm thinking about, like, YouTube tutorials that have been by women.
Yeah. But what I will say, and so I agree with your point definitely about that, and it's something that I've not thought about, and now that you've told me, I will see that constantly. What I've noticed recently is the university is advertising for courses, and most of the courses have a picture of a man. And so I made a decision a while ago that I didn't really want to. I would only kind of go to things that had a male and female representation of speakers. And then, you know, so you start to, like you said, you start to kind of dig into that a bit deeper and you see it. What I have noticed though is young girls, so I would say 15, 16-year-olds who are more YouTube stars because of beauty and stuff like that, but their technology knowledge is off the charts in terms of software that they use to create that stuff without even realizing, or anyone commenting on that. Like I watched this kind of 15, 16-year-old the other day who was, you know, how to be a YouTuber. And, you know, she was like, do you use this? And then you tap here and then you do this. And then you use this piece of software. And this is how I do my background. And then I have flashing stars. And then I'm this and I'm that. And I'm like, yeah, cool. Do you know what I mean? But it'd be really fascinating to dig into the stats on that stuff. That's not, those questions are not being asked at the moment, I don't think, in the industry.
Yeah, and I think that, like, there's been a big push for more women in tech, but I think, and I should have looked up these numbers ahead of time, but a girlfriend and I were just talking about this, and she was saying that the numbers are down, that there's actually less women graduating, and so I feel like it's a whole issue, and I also feel like we talk about trying to get more women into tech, and I think we also need to just get more, like, shithead males out of tech too. Like, you know, we talk about barriers for women. Well, part of the barriers for women going into tech are this toxic masculinity that's coming from men. And so making, you know, trying to get women to then fit into that workplace, it needs to go both ways. You need to have men who are on board with having a diverse and anti-sexist and anti-racist workplace.
I've brushed up come across a couple of those men who, you know, are the rock star, have the knowledge, don't want to share, don't want to teach anyone, you know, don't want to talk to anyone, please leave me alone. I mean, I like working in an agile way because that kind of forces that behavior to not be there, but it doesn't entirely get away from it. And when I was a CIO at one of the I made the choice to interview anyone that was coming into the department. So to make sure that we had that kind of diverse representation and to make sure that we weren't employing people like that, basically.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And so, you know, what would you recommend then, say, for companies that are thinking about diversity? I mean, this is a big topic, so maybe we'll just stick to gender diversity, you know, with what's going on in the world at the moment. Just so, you know, there's a lot of programs that are working with schools and girls and encouraging that, you know, because what you can't see, you can't do. And so I've got an earlier podcast in this series around some work that's happening around schools, etc. And one thing that comes to mind is, you know, when I talk to my children, the teachers that are teaching tech are still male as well. So
yeah, for sure. I do think that there is that component of what you see, and having that diversity of what you're seeing is important.
Yeah.
But I will say that I know that just speaking on the gender topic, I feel like compelled as a white woman to not to stop doing that, right? To not just talk about it as a gender issue, because we have to be more intersectional and yeah, like focusing on the most marginalized. I heard this statistic about affirmative action in America,
Yeah.
which was supposed to be helping race, has actually helped more white women than it has any of the races.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's that thing of diversity and inclusion. It's the easiest way to be inclusive is hiring a white woman. And so I guess I never thought about, when I thought about feminism before, I'm like, of course it's all women. Of
Mm.
course. It's just gender. We're just talking about gender here. Like, of course, if you're Muslim, of course, if you're Black, of course, if you're, you know, disabled and, you know, a person who's disabled and poor, like it's inclusive. But then I'm sure you see this too, right? Then you go to panels for women and they're all white women, or even I've gone to tech conferences, all
Yeah.
of the people have been white
Yeah.
and a lot of the attendees are white, and it's like this isn't right, like
Mm.
this isn't actually the diversity and inclusion that we need to be going after.
Yeah. I mean, you asked me around this podcast, you know, and I was quite pleased, but it wasn't conscious, it was unconscious around the diversity of the guests that I've had on this show. And when I did look at that, I was like, okay, that's a good representation of women in the workforce. And so I was kind of quite pleased about that.
Yeah, you should
Um,
be really proud of that.
well, you know, it wasn't conscious, like I said, but now it is something
Yeah,
that I'm conscious about. But I think it's that consciousness, and then it's what do you actually do about it. And so for companies,
yeah,
you know, particularly around gender, around diversity, around race, etc., there's the consciousness of it, and then what are we actually going to do? And so I know myself personally, and there's actually guests that I'd like to have on the show in the future around unconscious bias and exploring that.
mm,
But I know now when I look at CVs, I don't look at the name. And so I'm looking at the skill set, but not looking at the name, to try and not have a conscious bias, an unconscious bias or a bias around who.
yeah,
And then also when I
mm.
then do look at the name, it's like, okay, in terms of males and females, have we got a good mix?
Yeah, I think that's like an interesting world that we're in right now, because that reminds me of like how we're also told, we've kind of been told to be colorblind, to not look at people by their race, to
Mm.
not judge them if they're Black or white. But actually, we do need to start doing that. We do need to start putting race and gender into the factor of our decision making.
Yeah,
And so it's like being conscious of all of our biases, also having an action plan of like, what are we wanting to be, what are we wanting to do,
yeah,
and then bringing in, and I think the other thing that I'm starting to understand about diversity and inclusion, it almost feels like a thing of the past, like it almost feels gross saying diversity and inclusion. Like I feel like we need to start saying like anti-racism work, like bringing
yeah.
down
Did you see my
bring
face then? You know, that's a hard word. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
because it's acknowledging like this is actually the issue. The
Mm.
issue isn't being more inclusive. The issue is just not being racist or
Yeah.
working on the racism that we all have.
Yeah.
And so I think that like trying to make the one Black person in the room and default to him or her, them, you know, to give us all the answers for our racism it's not
No.
their problem. It's like white people's problem to solve. So obviously this is on
But
my
it,
mind a lot right
yeah.
now, and I'm trying to process how to go about it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are. So I talked to a girlfriend of mine who's got an Asian background, and she said, you know, when she changed her surname to a much more Anglo-Saxon sounding name,
Mm,
she would get callbacks on jobs. But she then, because she had a white partner, if she goes traveling in her home country, she gets judged on that. She gets judged differently if she's by herself, and then she gets judged differently again in Australia. And so it's quite a super complex, you know, issue. So she gets,
yeah,
you know, she's a bit like, where do I fit? know what I mean? And then also, so her background is Chinese, but she's a darker Chinese. So then she says she gets judged because she's a darker Chinese. It's like, oh my God, what I thought was one thing is actually 10 with
Totally.
rounds of that. Yeah.
I've never, you've probably heard the term white privilege. I've
Mm.
never heard the term light-skinned privilege. So among people of color, there's privilege depending on what shade of color you are.
Yeah.
And I think that's
I'd certainly heard of it because I lived in India for a while, and so when I was there, it was warm, and so I'd spend the weekend sort of by the pool or whatever, and then I got told, "Oh, you shouldn't be sunbathing," and so this was by the people that I worked with in the office. Your skin is getting darker; it looks a much better lighter. Which it was just bizarre to me.
yeah, right. It's a whole level of
Oh,
discrimination that
yeah.
we're
And then
not
I would get
exposed to.
also, my wife is very white, and that was a good thing for that person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's a bit deep.
Good.
But let's stick with women in IT. And I mean, it was really interesting for me to hear your thoughts as a new, and what you see as a, because I've been working in IT for 30 years, and I think you kind of get used to what you see. So I'm really excited about what I'd never actually thought about, the comments of, it's the men on the blog posts and all the rest of it. And I think, some of that could be women are scared to kind of put themselves out there, or do you know what I mean? So yeah. Quotas, what are your thoughts on quotas?
Ooh, that's a good question. Quotas. Yeah, I think that quotas are great, like in the sense that if it helps keep HR or the executive team that's wanting to have certain actions or see their company in a certain way, helps them keep accountable, right? Because it's hard. When you're wanting to keep yourself accountable, if you just keep talking about things qualitatively, then it's hard to know if you've arrived or what the progress is that you've made. So I think that having something that's quantifiable is important to track that progress. However, I was talking with a girlfriend about, like, all right, well, what in that hiring process of like males and females, and like if you have 50% men and 50% women, or people who identify as such, right? And if those women don't feel safe to speak up, there's not that psychological safety and security and trust, what's the point? Who cares? Who cares if you have equal representation? But if you have a company that's 60%, 70%, but a lot of those women are in leadership positions and decision makers and have, a big sway and persuasion on company direction, then, like, what is the most valued here? Is it just ticking the box? And I feel like also this is something that I looked at in venture capital, around when you are looking at teams, venture capital teams, and sure, they have a woman, but you know what? You look at their job title, what is it? It's community, or it's
HR,
admin, or it's HR, or it's chief of staff, which is all fine, but it's not
the decision
managing director. It's not, investor. It's not president.
Yeah, and what I always find is in any leadership team, there's an A team and there's a B team of the leadership team. So there's the key decision makers. And so the experience that I've had is that you've still got a lot of, so there might be a good representation of women in that team. Sorry, the sun's shining off my table into my face. You might see a good representation of women, but they still won't be in the largest key P&L decision-making roles for that.
Yeah, right.
And they'll be in of the A and B team.
Yeah, I saw this meme the other day, and it was like professors who want to do more like white white male professors who want to do more about racism on campus, retire early. That's what you can do. And I feel like the same thing could be said for corporations, these like white dudes who are like, what can I do? And it's like, quit, give up your seat, give up that position of power. That's like gonna help,
Yeah,
right?
and look, they don't want to, and you kind of, the other side of it is, who could blame them? Happy days that they've probably worked hard to get there and all the rest of it. So, but they're still making decisions based on their biases. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And so I think, and also it's kind of like, who are you bringing along behind you as well? So I know every time I've been in a leadership role as a woman, I've ended up with more women in my team. And again, not necessarily that consciously, it's just,
Right.
So what do you think, is the best piece of career advice that you've been given?
Yeah. I'm checking my notes to see what I said before. Oh, I think, yeah. Yeah, I think the follow your curiosity thing. I read this book called Big Magic. It's by Elizabeth Gilbert. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love.
Yeah.
And
what's it called?
I don't
Big Magic.
it's called Big Magic. Yeah. I can't remember what like the subtitle is, but it's something really long because that's what authors are doing now these days, right? Is like the longest titles. But yeah, it was essentially like I also quote this. This is by Michael Lewis. He wrote Big Short and Moneyball, and he was talking to some graduates, and he said, yeah, follow your passion, follow your dreams, if you're lucky enough to have one.
Yeah.
And I think that the pressure that we put on kids and 20 somethings, and I'm in my 30s, like I still kind of feel a pressure to like have a dream and have this wild passion that just consumes me. And that's actually really rare to have that. And so I think that like Elizabeth Gilbert's approach of curiosity has really helped me in my career of kind of taking it day by day and letting myself tinker and experiment and explore and then seeing what sticks. And if it doesn't stick, if I don't want to commit 20 years to machine learning, that's okay. But maybe I'll find something in machine learning that's interesting to me around policy work or what have you. That, so I think that pressure of having a passion is alleviated by focusing on your curiosity.
Yeah, I like that. And I think in my 30s, I felt a bit similar, that I didn't really have a passion. And then, I'm in my late 40s now, so got a bit more time on my side. But, I now understand, that I'm passionate about horses, that I enjoy spending time with them. I did as a kid, and then, went away from it. From a work perspective, I'm passionate about helping women in their careers, hence the podcast. And then I enjoy problem solving. And so those are kind of like the hooks, so to speak, that I've figured out. But again, and that could evolve as well. From that.
So cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I was like, because I grew up with a dad who was extremely passionate and still is about aircraft, and he was an aircraft engineer, and that was very consuming, and he just loved that stuff. And so that, I think for me, I was always like, oh, I'm just a bit of a kind of not that great, good at, okay at a few things. Does that make sense? And not great at anything. And so, I understand, but I do like that, what are you curious about, and not putting pressure on yourself.
Yeah. And, our culture, and I know that Australian culture is different than American culture, but similar enough to praise the people who are consumed by their passion and who, become obsessive, and it is all encompassing. There's not many books written about someone who's like a generalist, right?
Yeah.
Who has a healthy, balanced lifestyle and that like is content with where they're at in their career. Like, no, we talk about the scientist who's like broken, who has 20 patents and yada, yada, yada. So I think that it's like
celebrating generalist. Yeah, you could do a book about that. Write a book.
Yeah.
And tell me your superpower then. I've been asking people lately what their superpower is.
I like it. So I think that my superpower probably goes along with that curiosity bit, and it's just trying things that scare me. So
Yeah.
I did stand up earlier in the year,
Oh, like
and
you.
like comedy, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it was so scary. I had sweat so much. I was so sweaty. Um, but yeah, so I think that, and changing careers and just entrepreneurship in general is really scary.
Yeah.
And taking risks, I think that that's something that I is my superpower.
I
Doing
like
things
that.
that are
There's a lady that I follow. She's actually a horse lady. Her name's Jane Pike, and she talks about, what are your dreams, and then what's the smallest reality of that, and how do you then kind of make that happen to then sort of build and practice, because you only get comfortable with those things after you practice.
yeah, yeah, I love that. Yeah. Yeah.
And so your dream might be to be as, I can't think of any great women comedians, which is terrible. Um,
Well, there's so many.
there's
Tina
so many.
Fey, Ellen
That's
DeGeneres.
right. Okay. So
Yeah.
your dream might be to be Ellen, but the smallest part of, I was thinking Tom Hanks, and I don't know why. The smallest part of being Ellen is you going and doing stand up
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Doing that one
in
night.
the local club. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. After doing it, and I think this is the beauty of experimenting, I was like, I don't need to do this. Like, this isn't a world I need to be a part of anymore. I scratched that itch.
Yeah.
So
You've tried it though.
hmm
Yeah. That's good. I like that.
yeah, yeah, thanks.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I think we covered a couple of topics there. I really enjoyed your energy when we met up. I really, I like your continuous learning and your curiosity.
Mm,
I think it's what kind of keeps us alive. And I think, reskilling into being a dev as a woman as well later in your career, there's something a bit brave about that as well.
mm.
So,
Aw, thank you so much.
um,
Appreciate that, Sam.
but good luck. I want to
Thanks.
see you blogging on some, tech blogs about what you found.
Yeah, I've been writing a couple. I've been writing more about my experience,
Yeah,
and I am realizing after talking about this, and I even thought about this before, I need to write more technical blog posts.
yeah.
So I'm gonna start doing more of that.
Okay, that's on your list. Good. Where can people find you, Nikki?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, I'm Nikki Ricks. Twitter, I'm Nikki Ricks. Instagram, I get a little bit more grimy on Instagram. So I'm Nikki Ricks on Instagram too, but you
Okay.
probably don't want to find me there.
They might get surprised. Thank you so much for being on the show. I think that's inspirational for anyone out there who's wanting to have a go at something new and try something new and give it a crack. I always say give stuff a crack. But like that do that smallest version of whatever that big thing.
Mm,
Awesome. Thank
totally.
you so much.
Yeah, you bet, Sam. Thank you.